you don't have as many mistakes as Wikipedia. I'll say that. Wikipedia, they're still out there perpetuating the idea that Lois and Clark in Hollywood told us that we had to hold off on the wedding.
Thank you. The timing of that doesn't even sync up. I've always been confused by that statement.
It doesn't, it never happened. They didn't care what we were doing, except that they liked the civilian stuff we were doing in the Daily Planet in our books. And they wanted, like, basically, Jeanette Kahn and I put together a Bible. And back then, there was no PowerPoint. So I did it with glue sticks and Xeroxes. And I put it together, and it was called, we pitched Lois Lane's Planet. And it was all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. Some of it, there was some gangbuster in there. There was Morgan Edge. There was, Cat Grant and all that stuff, and Lois and Clark's romance. So, and Jimmy Olsen getting fired and all those things. And they bit and they turned it into Lois and Clark. And, once, once they got up and running, they never talked to us. They didn't want to hear our notes anymore. They didn't want to do anything with us, and I gave notes, boy. I gave a lot of notes on that stuff, but they didn't listen. And Jeanette and I decided that we wanted to hold off the wedding. And if the TV show lasted long enough to get to a wedding, then we should do a comic book at the same time, the same month that hit the air. And then the show, as their ratings were going down in the fourth season, they started saying, "Oh, we're going to do a wedding real quick," and they didn't tell us at first. So we scrambled and we put together the wedding special, just because we needed to have our original idea that of simultaneous combustion happen at the same time, and we got everybody who worked on Superman to work on it. Even the guys who were off Superman at that time
Your
came
office is
back.
always great about that. Like Curt Swan kept coming back. It was incredible.
That one, Curt Swan was already dead by the time we did that.
I,
And
I meant the
but
other ones before that, but yes.
yeah, but I kept giving him inventory stories just so that he would have work. And so we had a drawer full of inventory stories that I could pick pages from, and we took pages from one of the stories and used that in the wedding
Yeah, it was
issue.
incredible. Really incredible.
Yeah,
Amazing way to honor him.
it was great to have him be involved, because he was a big part of us of us coming up with the whole super summit thing, the idea of having everybody get together in the same room. And he was there. We were all at a convention in Cleveland, believe it or not, in 1988 for the 50th anniversary of Superman. And me and Jerry Ordway and George Perez and Curt Swan were there representing DC. And we just all went out to dinner. Roger Stern was there too. And we went out to dinner, and we needed to plot what was going to happen in the books. So we were started talking about it, and George got so excited he wanted to join the group. Uh, and we basically plotted the action annual where the Eradicator is established, and Curt Swan was contributing ideas to it, and it was just like, that's why Curt Swan drew some of that action annual too,
That's so cool.
because he was involved, and it was important to me to keep these guys involved. And I asked Kurt at the end of that dinner, I said, "So how does that compare to the way it was when you guys were working with Julie Schwartz in the old days?" And he goes, "Oh, they didn't let us get involved in the stories."
Of course not.
And I was like, "Oh no." I
Old,
felt so
yeah.
bad. I felt bad, and I was like mad at Julie Schwartz for not letting him be involved. George didn't stick around because he was kind of overloading himself too. He just was like, I guess, was he already on Wonder Woman? I guess he was finishing up his run on Wonder Woman.
And
And
he was sick too, wasn't he? I think that was part
he,
of the issue.
yeah, he got, was it carpal tunnel or one of those things?
Right, yeah,
But
yeah.
there was a point where he was drawing lying on a couch, and he was definitely not in good shape for that point. And he was also doing War of the Gods, which kind of got messed up and didn't happen right either. So he was kind of there more spiritually, kind of quickly. And then Kerry Gammill got to stick around a little longer because what we had George do was he did thumbnail layouts on typewriter size paper. And then I had, so he got paid a little less for that. And then I gave that money to Kerry Gammill and had him lightbox George's layouts onto the boards so that Brett Breeding could ink it. And it was kind of there was more monsters involved than usual.
Gary
And,
Gammill.
but it worked out great. Nobody could tell. And I still didn't miss shipping either.
He's still my favorite cover artist ever on Superman comics. I think
George.
honestly,
Yeah.
no, actually, Kerry. I think
Oh,
he's.
Kerry. I love Kerry. I wish if Kerry was faster, Kerry would have been there for years, as
I
far
think
as I was concerned.
I can honestly say he's the reason I got into Superman comics in the first place. Was his covers attracted me as a 12-year-old, and I
Yeah.
stayed for what was inside.
Yeah, he was the best, I gotta say. The thing is, a lot of artists went to the High School of Art and Design. In New York, we had a vocational high school for art,
Right.
and I studied cartooning and animation there. And actually, Dick Giordano came and he gave a lecture on one Saturday, and we all sat in the cafeteria and listened to him talk.
That's so
And
cool.
he gave out a packet, and in the packet was a script for some Batman pages. And he says, draw these pages and send them to me, and I'll pick 10 people to come in for a private lecture at DC. And I was like, ooh. So I think Dick Giordano went to the High School of Art and Design. So this was his payback.
That's so
And
cool.
so I drew these Batman pages. I don't remember the issue number, but it was a Catwoman story, and there was a cage involved and some tigers. And so I drew them as good as I could draw them. And I got picked for that. And Dick, I went in on a Saturday. It was crazy. I went into this conference room and they had all these old DC licensed toys and things in a glass case. And I was like, man, this is the greatest place. I can't stand it. And Dick did his lecture. I don't have those pages anymore. I guess DC probably still had them then, but now they're lost to 5 or 6 moves and then a trip across the country. Uh, and so anyway, that was kind of fun. But the High School of Art and Design had a big tie to DC in that many of the people who worked at DC went to the High School of Art and Design. Neil Adams was had the same homeroom teacher as I did.
That's awesome.
And he had some Neil Adams stuff locked up in a closet in his homeroom. And he would show it to us because he knew we were into comics. And we would be like, oh my God, there's hope for me because it's good, but it's not there yet. It's not Neil Adams yet. And DC was an art class in a way because one of the jobs the interns had was to Xerox pages that came in for the editors. So I was Xeroxing Walt Simonson art. Batman Manhunter story was just coming in.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I know.
Great time to be
And
there.
I was Xeroxing Bernie Wrightson pages because he was
Oh,
doing Swamp Thing. And and then there was some other pages in the drawer because they had paid they had interns there that weren't really interns. They called them woodchucks before us. And that Pat Broderick was one of those guys. And there was stuff in the drawers that all these guys had drawn. And Jack Kirby was doing Commandy at the time. So
beautiful.
I was Xeroxing these pages and I was like, I'm never going to be good enough. I learned that I was never going to be, I never would have had the patience to do this stuff. I drew well enough to get my jokes across, but by being an intern there, I learned I'm not going to be a superhero artist ever. But I knew a lot about superheroes and I learned, I learned about storytelling because after high school, I went to college for art, the School of Visual Arts, also in New York City. And luckily, I was born in New York City, so this was all just there. I could take the subway and get to all these things. Uh, my teachers were Harvey Kurtzman and
Wow.
Will Eisner. So I learned about storytelling from Will Eisner and gag cartooning from Harvey Kurtzman.
I can't
So
imagine even being able to talk to Will Eisner. Like, I am so envious of your experience.
I talked to him. In fact, he was my first job in comics in that he came in one day and he was doing little joke books for Scholastic. And he said, okay, guys, I'll pay $1 a joke for anybody who wants to try. And then for jokes that I pick, you get $1. I made $300 on those stupid books. And so I was like, Eisner liked me. He liked my jokes. Harvey Kurtzman was the best because at the end of every semester, he would take the whole class out for beer. And I was just like, I didn't really drink back then, but it was still great to just be sitting in a pub with Harvey Kurtzman. I mean, this is
Absolutely.
the best. And I mean, these were the greats. These were the guys who invented Mad Magazine and, you know, storytelling, and they were available and we could get in touch with them. And it was just the best.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that stuff went on my resume. So when I graduated from college, I brought my portfolio to Crazy magazine because Mad was pretty much a closed shop. Cracked seemed like a fly by night operation to me. I didn't understand who owned it or ran it, or I didn't even know if they paid people. I that was just always seemed a little less than for me. And Marvel was Marvel, so I was like, well, at least these people are getting paid. And Crazy Magazine is pretty much the same as Mad Magazine. So I brought my stuff up there. I cold called the art director listed in the masthead, and that was Marie Severin. And she was really nice. And she said, well, the way it works here, I'm called the art director on it, but the editor is the guy who picks what goes in the book. So you got to talk to Larry Hama. And Larry Hama took my call and she transferred me over. I made an appointment. I brought my portfolio up and he looked at it and he says, well, I don't think your art is any good, but I like your jokes. So I ended up
Good.
by the time it went away, I had 3 pages a month in Crazy Magazine, and that was more than enough to pay my rent. And it was just great. And then I got offered the staff job of assistant editor. When Mark Grunwald got promoted, uh, he interviewed me and he picked me. I don't know how many other people he interviewed, but he picked me. And we really became like best friends right from the first day. It was amazing. And I got medical coverage.
Hey,
So
there you go.
like the greatest year of my life that year.
And you started doing some serious writing as well at that point, didn't you?
Well, that was because if you're in the proximity, like I wrote and drew a short story for Bizarre Adventures that Denny O'Neil was the editor of. I also got to meet Denny O'Neil. And he it was a Christmas issue, and I pitched him this idea, and I wrote and drew this thing that was going to be in black and white and just red because it was going to have a lot of blood in it. And it that ran, and then the other editors just knew that I was around. And when somebody left Kazar, Bruce Jones was leaving Kazar, the editor, and Kazar kind of, people forget that Bruce Jones was kind of injecting a lot of humor in Kazar at that time. And it wasn't straight superhero-y stuff. So the editor, Danny Fingeroth, he looked to me and I said, I'll take a shot at this. And then I got promoted to editor and they let me work with John Byrne on Fantastic Four. But I got canned and I called up Denny O'Neil right away because he had left Marvel and with it under disputes with the same person who fired me.
Oh, Jim Shooter.
I didn't want to say
Of
anything,
course not.
but yeah, he was definitely wielding his power
Hmm.
at that time.
From what I
So I
understand,
got
1986 was a very difficult year to be working at Marvel.
not fun.
Yeah.
Although I will say that it kind of banded the rest of the staff and the freelancers together with a common enemy, which was really kind of good. So anyway, Byrne, I'm sure, said, so anyway, DC knew that I was looking for a job because I called up Denny O'Neil right away and he said, I don't have any jobs, but I can take you to lunch. And I said, I'm going to need some food. So let's do that. And then, I just was around DC and every now and then I met Andy Helfer and we talked about working with John Byrne and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure that DC, when they were going to have Andy go off to do the Justice League, said to Byrne, "Is like, what do you think? Who can you work with here?" And he said that he could work with me because we had worked on Fantastic Four, and I'm sure that helped get me in the door. You know, so then I ended up, working with Byrne and Marv Wolfman and Ordway on the Superman line. And it was like it was kind of fun. One of the things I think, one of the abilities I had, and I think what a good editor has, is knowing which guys you should stick your nose in on and which guys you should leave alone. And Byrne was a leave alone guy because he had his finger on some pulse at the time that, put him at the top of the heap.
Yes.
And who was I to mess with that, you know? And it became my job to protect him from DC and protect DC from him. And it was great. It was definitely the perfect way to be. And when he left, that was when I became the editor of Superman in
Right.
my mind. That was when I said, I'm hiring the guys I want to hire. Byrne was there before me, Ordway was there before me, Marv was there before me. I inherited that situation. And
Roger Stern was doing fill-ins before you, right? Or was that around the same time that you joined?
Roger Stern did an annual for me, two annuals, and he had written some fill-ins that I had Mike Mignola and Kerry Gammill draw. So yeah, he was around. He was also a guy I worked with at Marvel. He
Right.
was I was the assistant editor on the Avengers, and to me he was like a dream writer. He thought about everything in the right way, and he understood what he was doing. And then when we were getting towards the point where we were going to put on a fourth title, obviously I went to my Marvel friends again, and Louise Simonson was big. I wanted to get Bogdanove, and they were friends. I knew they got along, so I wanted to, pepper the group with people that I liked. And Dan Jurgens was probably the only guy who hadn't worked at Marvel on my crew. Even Ordway inked Byrne for me on Fantastic Four.
Okay.
That was how I met Ordway. So we kind of became chummy, and we would all hang out together. Like John Beatty was inking uh, Byrne, and we would all go to Connecticut where Byrne lived, and Beatty was visit from Florida, and Ordway lived in Connecticut. So we'd all go up there and we'd spend the weekend inking pages, and I would be doing backgrounds and just to help make sure that Beatty could meet all the deadlines too. So it really was like a studio. We had like a system. They weren't letting me ink people or anything, so don't worry about that. Uh, but we would be sitting there, and Beatty just for some reason thought it was the funniest thing that Jimmy Olsen took a cab in one story,
The
and
650.
he got out of the cab,
I love that joke.
and the guy said, "That'll be 650, Junior." And then we just spent the weekend saying 650 Junior because it would make Beatty laugh so hard. He just thought that was the funniest thing in the world. So then everything became 650. Every cab ride in Metropolis cost 650. Ultimately, we used that for a couple of years,
Oh, it was hilarious. There were
and
so
it
many
was and
background gags.
I wish these movies and animation people would pick up on it Lois and Clark should have done something with that.
Well, you've got Big Belly Burgers in the DCU now in the movies.
Yes, thank you. And I am a proud co-creator of that, even though the editors don't get that credit in anything. And I actually did the thumbnails for the first appearance of the Big Belly guy, which was in a Mr. Mixer's story.
Right.
And he brought the Big Belly guy to life. And while this is another session where Ordway was at my house in Brooklyn, and I was doing thumbnails that he was then going to use. That Byrne wrote the plot, and I was doing the thumbnails, and then Ordway would turn it into real art. But it was mostly my storytelling, and he would fix things if he didn't like them or whatever. But it was a time, and the editor was I was in the thick of it. I was doing cover sketches. I have a couple of covers here in my house that people gave me because I did the sketch. Mignola and I lived in Brooklyn at the same time, and I needed a cover overnight for a Silver Banshee story. And I did a sketch on the train
Wow.
as we were going back to Brooklyn, and he slipped the cover under my door the next day at home. So it was just like it was the best. And he gave me the cover for my birthday, which was awesome.
That's awesome.
It was great. It was a good time, man. It was definitely a creative and really collaborative time. And now with the internet, I don't think people get that close as much anymore. And
Yeah, people work from distances and different states, let alone
yeah,
different
you can
offices.
work in different countries. So it's like it's not the same. Well, 88 was the first dinner, so we didn't call it a super summit yet. And then the next year, 89, uh George Perez was coming to town for some reason, and he was in a hotel room, maybe for a convention. And the second meeting was in his hotel room or Roger's hotel room. I can't remember exactly. And we literally just sat on the floor and plotted out the next year's worth. And I went back to DC and I said, look, this is a good thing. It helps. It really makes everybody feel like they're part of something. And it's good for morale. And you do get the jokes. You get
Yeah.
the joke, and some of the jokes paid off big because one of the jokes that Ordway would say at these meetings was, "Let's just kill him" whenever we
Yep.
got stuck. And it was like, and once we got to that era, it, that stuck.
And
But
the
anyway, it was just I went to them and I said, "Look, we got to find a way to fly guys in and have a meeting here for 2 or 3 days in the office." And I got them to do that for about a bunch of years, 6 or 7 years. So 90 was the first one. We did one meeting in Florida in Orlando when they were shooting the Superboy TV show, and we all got to be extras in an episode.
right,
Uh, and basically, it's like it was. I made it. I I did anything I could to make my job easier. The super summits helped because everybody would come in with ideas and we would get it all on paper and we'd have a spine for the year for every year. And and then I came up with this system of Xeroxing every single thing that came in for everybody. So we had little pouches in my office where if a plot came in, everybody got a copy of it. Penciled pages came in, everybody got copies of the pencils.
wow.
Cover sketches, finished art, inked art, everything went in there. And so everybody on Saturday would get a FedEx delivery of the week's work. The fringe benefit here was that I was asking them to keep the continuity,
Right.
and I didn't have to worry about as much. And the
Wow.
fact that I had one colorist on everything
Yes.
made everything
By the way.
even better. So everything was geared towards making my day easier because there was going to be enough hard things in my day.
Right.
And honestly, continuity is it's a great thing if you're the reader. It's a pain in the ass if you're the guys doing it. It's there's a lot of pitfalls, there's a lot of easy ways to make mistakes, and there's a lot of stuff that gets forgotten sometimes. There's a guy on that Triangle page on Facebook who keeps, putting out, well, whatever happened to this thing that was brought up, and I was like, where did Morgan Edge go and all this, and I don't know, man. We forgot about him.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask about that is you make it sound as if this is every editor's job. Very few editors prioritize continuity anywhere near to the extent that you did. But I want
Well,
to ask, oh, go
let
ahead.
me tell you that the reason it started because Marv quit, because then John Byrne was co-plotting and scripting with Ordway on Adventures of Superman. So now it was one guy writing Superman and action and the book in between as well. So it was just a natural thing for Byrne to keep the stories connected, and to so he was always aware of where everything was.
Right.
So that's when it kind of began, and it was started small.
But it's after Byrne leaves that the continuity really becomes impressive
And
because,
it's after Byrne leaves that I knew I have to do something to keep people here because I don't have Byrne anymore.
right.
So Byrne had this last issue he did has Superman kill these General Zod's and company. So I said, if John Byrne is going to have Superman kill this guy, what does that do to his head? And we got a year's worth of stories for that we called Exile at this point, Superman in Exile. And that was all the stuff that was plotted at that dinner, that first dinner. And it was all this stuff that led up to, we had all the War World stuff in there. We had the Eradicator stuff in there, everything that was set up. And we got years and years and years of stuff out of this. And it was all because I was afraid that people were going to leave the book. Again, we got Action Comics back. Then Paul Levitz kept coming to my office and saying, when are you going to give me a fourth book? When are you going to give me a fourth book? And I was like, I don't
Right.
want to do a fourth book. Three books is hard. All right, all right. And I kept sending toys and things to John Bogdanove's son, whose name is Kal-El.
Are you serious?
That's why I knew it was only a matter of time
I knew
before.
he was a super fan. I didn't know it went that deep. That's awesome.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say the real secret, but it is his name. He goes by that name professionally. He's a voice acting coach. He does video game voice acting, directing, and everything now. My little Kal-El. My little Kal-El is now about 40 years old. So
Wow.
so anyway, I was sending him stuff with a note that says, go and bug your father, tell him to start drawing Superman. So, and then I finally got him, and he came with Louise Simonson, and we had four titles. And it was just like, hey guys, when you come in the door, we're trying to tie these things together. We'll have this meeting you can come to, and you'll be there with the other guys, and everybody's in the soup. But it's all about Superman. It's not about Dan Jurgens. It's not about, Jerry Ordway. It's not about me. It's about Superman. You got to check your ego at the door. And they were both, they're egoless people anyway.
Right.
So that was easy. But as we would change talent over the years, they had to know that that was the deal because not everybody can do that,
Right.
you know.
And I would think Simonson, having been an editor himself, would be understanding of that as well.
Right, but it's like, but like you say, it's so hard to do the continuity that it's
Yes.
like, what editor would do that to themselves on purpose? And I did it mostly because I was afraid of losing readers. We started getting really positive critical notice. We weren't selling the X-Men numbers, but we were getting positive reviews in the buyer's guide and elsewhere.
I think
And
you were
people
DC's second most lucrative office at the time. Is that right?
probably,
Yeah, I
I
think you
don't
were number
know.
two.
I didn't check, I would look at the sales figures, but I didn't let them rule my day. Uh, a lot of my motivation was I wanted Superman to be selling more than Dazzler,
Yeah.
you know?
And just to clarify, I never thought that you guys had low sales. What I picked up on instead was there was a hunger, especially around the time of Dark Knight over Metropolis and on, where it felt like you guys wanted Superman to be number one again.
Yeah,
Where
well,
come,
that came from us. That never
yeah.
came from management. Management, even after the death of Superman, they never came and said, "When are you going to do something bigger than that?"
So the
It,
fourth
it,
type, yeah.
it
I'm
was
so
just
sorry.
our own motivation to try to. You always tried to top yourself, and when you're a little group like that, that's part of the idea of sending pouches every Friday, so they get them every Saturday, was so that there'd be a healthy competition between the guys. Everybody would say, "Oh my God, Dan Jurgens drew 50 pages this week. How do I have to compete with that?" And Bogdanove, who was naturally slower, did better because everybody wanted to be part of the doing better team.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we would have Batman guest star. We would do a story like that, but we also made the story make sense. And it wasn't just here's a guest star. It was always integral to what was going on in the books. A couple of stories like the Jim Hudnall did Red Glass
Yes.
and uh and William Mesner Loebs did the Sinbad thing that I had Curt Swan draw. And I did those things to give a break to the guys so that they had one less issue to kill themselves over for a year, but also because they became little stunts in their own right. Curt Swan month came
Yes.
from that.
Yes, it
And
did.
it was just like, Curt Swan had been off the Superman books as a regular guy for long enough that it was a treat to have him come back, and it was like that way some old timers would come and look at the book again. People who maybe gave up on Byrne, and it's like I was always trying to make a better shoe. I always make that argument. It's like I used to fight with the marketing guys to some degree where it's like marketing shouldn't be telling us what to do in the comics. They should be selling the shoe that we make. If we make a shoe, you sell the shoe, and then you come and tell me that this shoe don't sell, we'll make a different shoe, you know, and that's how you get Superman Red and Superman Blue.
While we're on the topic of Curt Swan, one mystery that has perplexed me for a long time now. I'll present to you the information I know, and then tell me which parts I have wrong because it doesn't jibe together when I know. Part of it is that when Action Comics Weekly was happening, Mike Gold explained in the letter column, if it was in fact Mike Gold writing it, that Curt Swan could only produce 2 pages. I believe it was a month at that point. Um,
That's not true.
okay, that's the part that didn't make sense to me.
I don't know. Is that what he really wrote in there? I mean,
Somebody had written in
can you
saying,
produce
how,
that?
how come the Superman feature that Curt Swan was doing wasn't larger? And he said Curt
Yeah.
could only produce 2 pages. It would have been a week, not a month. My
Well,
bad.
that he shouldn't say stuff like that because that's not true. Curt was willing to draw as much as we would give him. Curt was drawing things like The Mask, which was a
Right.
toy tie-in. I mean, I always gave Curt work.
And he said in an interview that he was looking for more work from DC, which is why that never quite added up to me.
But we didn't give him enough. I mean, I will say that, because he was doing, Superman pretty regularly for 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
and it's like and I you got to look at the reality of it. It was like by relaunching Superman, they were trying to shock the system. They were trying to shake it up. And, Alan Moore's last stories were great, and they were great for Curt. And even George Perez got in on that too. But it was like, it was definitely, they needed to do something to jolt this person back to life. And so the paddles had to be put to the system. Now, again, Curt was always going to have work. It just was not as much as he wanted or as much as he needed, maybe. But I always kept him in, like I said, I had a lot of inventory stories that he did. I did a couple of weird issues where, because Kerry Gammill was slower, I had Kerry Gammill draw the top half of the
I
story.
love that. That's the gangbuster, right? That was that story.
Well, yeah, it was a Brainiac thing, if I remember correctly. I guess Gangbuster was in that.
Yeah.
And Curt did the bottom half of that.
Yes. And
You
then there
know,
was the one you also did with the what is the villain's name? The Atomic Skull, is that his name? Where
yeah,
half
that
was
was
Curt Swan in the old movie serial.
and yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I forgot about that one. That was because Bogdanove was getting behind.
It was
You
such
know,
a
so
creative way to incorporate him.
I tried to make my job a creative factor. I didn't just do things arbitrarily. I did try to, put things in sensibly, and I managed to not miss shipping it, because if you miss shipping on something that's coming out every week, you really screw up the dominoes and they don't fall right. And before there were triangle numbers on the cover, forget about figuring out how to read it. If they came out of order,
Right.
you could really screw it up. So, I mean, I just tried to, that was my creative contribution, was to be clever behind the scenes, and also to keep employing people like Curt Swan, because I wanted to. He was my Superman artist when I was a kid, and I didn't want to kick him to the curb, you
Sure.
know,
And
you
honestly,
know.
the Sinbad contract is some of the best, like more modern age stylized work I've seen him do. He really turned it on for that one.
Well, we definitely tried to up his game a little bit too. Not without, I didn't want to scare the guy either. And there was no way he was going to start drawing like Jim Lee. But at the same time, it was like, if we could find a way to get him jazzed up about stuff, it would be a positive thing. I always looked at Metropolis as, they put out a handbook for one of the role-playing games where they said that Metropolis and Gotham City were in Delaware and or something like that. And
I
they
have my
actually
own
put a
theory on
map
this.
in there. They put a map in there. I was like, you should never put this, never say this anywhere. Metropolis should be the next big city over from wherever a kid is reading a comic book.
Oh, that's disheartening because I had a whole theory as to where Metropolis was. I was hoping you could confirm it for me.
No, well, that's the one. Well, they may have said where it is anyway since then. I don't know. And a lot of people, like, look, in the Batman versus Superman, or Justice League movies, they basically put Gotham and Metropolis right next to each other anyway.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they're that close to each other. I think, see, to me, Metropolis was the good parts of Manhattan, and Gotham was the scummy parts of Manhattan.
Yes.
And it should be the same way that a kid who lives near Detroit thinks about it,
Hmm.
and the same way someone near Minneapolis thinks about it. And everybody should be thinking that this is the city I can get on a bus and go to,
It's a good way to look at
but
it.
you don't say where it is. Now there's other places like the Twin Cities are where Flash is, Central City, and Jay Garrick Flash and Barry Allen Flash. They live in two different cities that are right next to each other. Green Arrow lives in Seattle, basically. It's called Star City, but it's kind of located where Seattle is. And obviously then there's Teen Titans were in New York City.
Right.
They said they were in New York City.
Well, early in
And
Louise Simonson's work on Man of Steel, she was, or maybe it was Bogdanove was doing it. They were dropping references specific to New York City in the backgrounds of Metropolis. At one point, there's the World's Fair site with the globe in the background.
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting choice, at least. Then they sort of moved
well,
away from that.
that see, the editor should have stopped that because, but we did other things, like when we introduced the character Witty Banter, who was the
Mhm.
late night talk show host. That was based on the joke name that Barry Kitson made up for Glenn Whitmore, who was a
Oh,
colorist, because Glenn would say these hilarious things, but he wasn't even aware that he was saying something funny. And Barry kept calling him Witty Banter. That's your new name now.
oh,
And then
that's
we decided that that's going to be the Johnny Carson or David Letterman of this town. So when we drew the marquee of where that studio was, we drew David Letterman's studio,
mhm.
the marquee and his studio, because it was right outside the window of our DC office. So the Witty Banter Show has the same kind of lettering as the Late Show with David Letterman.
Love it.
You know, the other thing that I think we did right, and Byrne did it first because he was the guy drawing two books. The people in the background at the Daily Planet were always the same people.
Yes.
In everybody else's stories, Superman stories for forever, there was, Steve Lombard and there was Cat Grant and Lois and Clark and Perry White and Jimmy. And then everybody else was generic background person. And they didn't ever look the same. They didn't draw the same people twice.
Mhm.
Byrne drew a guy who was bald and had his glasses on the top of his head in the background. He never talked. He didn't have a name. We named him later. We named him Whit.
Yep.
And that was not for Glenn Whitmore. That was for Whitney Ellsworth, who was the Superman editor and the Superman TV show guy.
Oh, wow.
So that was our tribute to the old days. We always look backwards as we were going forwards. I mean, I thought that was kind of a fun thing we did.
The Adventures of Superman title coming from the TV show. Great
That's
homage.
exactly. I just wrote an introduction for a triangle omnibus where I say, this is how we do it. We know we're building on the shoulders of giants. We're definitely not. We didn't do it by ourselves.
Yeah.
And
Wasn't
that's
Keith Orphanage named after Phyllis Coates?
say it again.
I think Keith the orphan, his orphanage was named after Phyllis Coates.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
forgot about that. Oh, we love putting in street names and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
The only person it was hard to come up with stuff for was Boring Street. Just sounds like a bad place to live.
Or Wayne.
Yeah, and if we said Wayne, everybody think it was connected to Bruce Wayne. So he's the tough guy to get in there. But I think yeah, it was hard to get those kinds of things in there. But we took stuff from Julie Schwartz's era. I think Clark Kent's apartment address on Clinton Avenue or Clinton Street was from him. But we added Besselo Boulevard. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
George Reeves's real name.
No
It's
way.
George Besselo.
I did not know that.
Way.
Wow.
So it was always stuff like that because we were all Superman fans. We all wanted to put that stuff in there.
I know that this might have been, I'm not sure if this is before or after you had joined the office. When they were originally doing the early stages preparations way back in the day for Superman 4, supposedly they'd originally gone to the Superman office and asked Byrne and Wolfman to do a treatment for it. Is that true?
Yes. And the comic book called Superman and the Earth Stealers
Yes.
was John's movie pitch.
No kidding.
Yes, I'm not kidding.
I did not
That was
realize
John's
that.
movie pitch that we turned into that prestige book and employed Curt Swan again.
Right.
And it's out of continuity, obviously, but that was his pitch for a Superman movie. One of the other things you had on your outline there was you said that the idea for rebooting Superman came from Frank Miller and Steve Gerber.
That came from an interview with Wolfman and Helfer.
Steve Gerber?
That's what they said in Amazing
I
Heroes.
never heard that. What I heard, and that was before my time, so
Yeah.
I don't know for sure. But what I was told was that with the crisis and the idea of rebooting, they were going to reboot the whole line. They just didn't have the guts to do it or the ability to do it. And only Superman and Wonder Woman got rebooted, really. But they went to several creators and said, what would you do with Superman if we gave him to you? And Byrne was one of the guys. Keith Giffen was another one. I think Howard Chaykin was another one.
Ooh.
But I don't, and I'm sure Marv was involved in all that too. But I don't remember Frank Miller being part of that. And I don't remember Gerber being part of that. And did Steve Gerber even work for DC?
I don't think he did at that point. No.
He did later.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he did not. So I only knew that DC, Jeanette, Paul Levitz, and Dick Giordano, they were the three-headed monster that ran DC.
Did you say it to their
They,
faces?
they went to all these creators and said, tell us what you would do. And they picked Burns. And I think some of it was that they just were happy to steal somebody from Marvel.
Mhm.
They were happy to steal somebody who had X-Men numbers in his history,
Right.
you know, and
And Byrne was the
and
hottest thing in the industry at the time, of course.
and no offense, but Keith Giffen and Steve Gerber were not that,
Yeah.
you know. But
Because,
and who knows what their ideas were? I don't even know what they were
right. And
because
I
those
was only
three
going,
people and Andy Helfer were probably the only ones who read those outlines.
yeah. I was going only off of what Marv Wolfman said, which, you're only going from one person's perspective. But even he acknowledges that he didn't capture the level of clout that John Byrne did at the time. And
Yeah.
so that level of name brand status was everything. And what Wolfman said was he felt a lot of people had similar ideas on how to reboot Superman, but that
Mhm.
Byrne was the name that they needed attached to it.
And that's what the business should do. They should run their business like it's a business and try to make money. The thing is, look, I'd be lying if I didn't say that we were not aware of what Image was doing and what Marvel was doing with the X-Men and Punisher and Wolverine comics. And we were definitely, as a group, I guess we were resented that everybody thought Superman was a cornball Boy Scout
Yeah.
when these guys who would be slashing and cutting and murdering and all kinds of things were getting all the glory. And it was just like, this is a sad world
Yeah.
for us to be involved in here. I don't like what this says about people,
I
you
feel like you
know?
guys had to work really hard to undo the impression Dark Knight Returns created of Superman being the Boy Scout.
Yeah, I was never a fan of that particular interpretation.
No.
Uh, I don't think of my Superman does not work for the government. I think of the first issue that Mr. Mxyzptlk showed up. He first shows up looking like the Beyonder. And in the background, you see the Wit character and you see all the other denizens of the Daily Planet in the background. They're not part of the story, but they are the story. They're there to be endangered.
I'll
And
tell you one of my favorite moments, two of my favorite moments ever in the entire run that your office put out. One is Lois and Clark having breakfast at Dooley's pub.
we use Dooley a lot. That was Kevin Dooley.
Yep. And one was the party at Bibbo's bar, where everybody
Uh-huh.
sort of got together, just because those were the moments where you realize there's something far larger than Superman happening on those pages, and it felt like a family. It was incredible.
Well, that I do. I think that that's a criticism that I would have of all comic books, not just Superman comic books, but because there's a lot of comics out nowadays where it's only about superhero and what their problems are and who they're fighting and what his problem is. And they don't get into any of the civilian characters at all.
Right.
They're not even mentioned except that maybe a building falls on them or something in a fight. And it's like the thing that made our books really matter, and maybe it was because with 4 books a month, we had room to give to the rest of the city.
Sure.
We made the city a character in the book. It sounds corny, but it really was a thing. And I think Spider-Man books can benefit from that. I think that Batman books can benefit from that, and they just don't do enough of that.
Right.
You know, it's like I want Lucius Fox to matter to this city, and I want whoever else works for Wayne Enterprises to always be in the background.
Right. We know one employee at Wayne Enterprises.
Yeah, that's it.
But it also it works well as an answer to the question of how you write a comic for a character who is near invulnerable. Where even though Superman's powers were downscaled for the post-crisis, a
Hmm.
lot of what was at stake each month and each week really
Yeah.
was less about the superpowered battle and more about the human impact. And that was a
Well,
brilliant choice.
and that's what I get tired of people saying. Superman is hard to write. It's like he's not hard to write. He's the easiest guy in the world to write. Ma and Pa Kent made him care about people. They're and the best thing Byrne did was to keep them alive.
Yes,
Honestly, I think that that was a great move because they were what grounded Superman.
absolutely.
And ultimately, and that's where Smallville thrived when they did that TV show. It's like it was because of these great characters. And it looks like there's going to be a good Pa Kent scene in this new movie. I don't know what happened, but somebody said about something.
Yeah,
It's what Superman does with his powers for these other people who showed him the right thing to do.
absolutely.
All you got to do is have a guy who's trying to do the right thing with the abilities he has, and that's what we can all learn from that. Everybody says, "Oh, I like Batman because I could be Batman because I humans can." He's a human, and I could. That's the pinnacle of what I could achieve. And I'm like, yeah, but Superman has all these powers. I have abilities, and I'm going to do the best I can with the abilities I have. And I'm going to try not to kill somebody
It
because
was
it will throw me into a funk for a year.
it was a true exploration of what heroism actually is, where you had a character. I mean, first of all, when you first really took the reins over the office, you had Superman mourning and regretting his actions and killing the rogue Kryptonians, and
Well,
essentially
that's what I.
full identity.
The Zack Snyder's second Superman movie should have been Superman messed up by what he did.
And he could have a public breakdown and second guess himself and still come out a hero in the end. I One of my favorite stories that you guys did was the Scott Brubaker drunk driving flashback.
Oh yeah,
Oh
that's a great.
wow.
That's a great. Yeah, we did a lot of those one and dones that were about sidebars. Jurgens liked to do those a lot.
Yes.
I mean, I used to like the Metropolis mailbag
Oh my
Christmas issues.
gosh.
Those
Wow.
were fun because
Yes.
we got to see Metropolis, and
Superman pushing himself to try and save absolutely everybody
and
while
and
being mortal.
not always succeeding.
Right. Another favorite moment of mine that really, really, I mean, I'll be very clear. Superman is an absolute. Your version of Superman is a hero to me. And shaped a lot of my ethics. I love the moment where Lois is talking to him about Zorro, which was Batman's
Uh-huh.
inspiration. He goes, "I was more of an Atticus Finch guy myself," and I'm like,
Yep.
"Yes, that makes so much sense for who he is."
Yeah. No, it's true. And then, I would have little fights with other offices when they wanted to use Superman, because they would not get it.
Yeah,
And you know, I hesitate to give you examples because I don't want those people to be upset.
fair enough.
But it was when Byrne left, Byrne was the plan when Action Weekly came up, the plan was to do two Superman comics a month and Adventures of Superman in between. So Byrne was going to stay on Superman and do Superman, co-write Adventures, and do Superman twice a month.
Oh, okay.
And then he left suddenly. And he didn't leave in a huff like everybody says. And look, there were things he didn't like about how DC was handling stuff. Like he did not like that while we were all out there saying Superman is all new and all something, that there would be ads in the comics for coins that had Curt Swan Superman on them.
Mm.
These were deals that were in place, and he just thought you shouldn't put the ad right next to what we're doing and saying is new. Overreacting, maybe, maybe not. But anyway, that was kind of bugging him. But he didn't quit over that kind of stuff. And again, I told you in the emails, Marv and him, they didn't necessarily, they were a little oil and watery, but they also, they did respect what each other was doing. Byrne, all the Luthor stuff as a businessman, that's Marv's thing. Marv came up with that. And that's why there's more Luthor stuff Byrne loved it. So there's more Luthor stuff in Byrne stuff. Marv and John at different times left because they had things going on. that have nothing to do with comics, that have nothing to do with fights with anybody, and they're their stories to tell. A lot of people look, especially now that they're doing these triangle books, which I mean, these are expensive books. I'm glad somebody wants them
Yeah.
because if they don't sell, they won't do another one. And I would love it if the whole era was out and I could put it on a shelf and there it is.
It's fun seeing the buzz about it, like people talking about this run and getting excited about it again. It's wonderful.
It is, it is, but you got to remember, these Facebook groups, they're not millions of people. They're
No.
they're it's a small little vocal community. And I'm glad that anybody cares about it at all. I'm glad that I live at a time when comics I worked on are being collected. Well,
Well, I could pick your brain for 7 more years, but as I've kept you for 2 hours, I definitely want to give you a
yeah,
chance to.
you can see I don't mind talking, but like I said, if I have to read and make notes on things, I'm trying to escape that world.
Of course.
And I don't know if I said anything that helps you with your page, or
So
if you want to send me a random question once in a while before you write something down.
your talking to me today was more than I ever could have hoped for. So thank you.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you so much.